Chapter 5. Carl. Carl stared at the letter in his hands. He couldn't believe she had actually written him back. After speaking with Jessie and spending a few days in prayer, he'd felt that God was sending him in this direction, so he'd scoured the newspaper for ads from women looking to head west. Nothing had grabbed his attention, so he'd placed his own. 30-year-old farmer looking for a good Christian woman to marry and help with house. It had been simple, too simple, he'd worried, but now he had a letter in his hand, a response from a woman in Chicago named Elizabeth Parker. "Thank you," he said to Mr. Brown, who served as both the general store owner and the mail clerk for the town, before tucking the letter in his pocket. He'd read it, but not here. He wanted to go somewhere away from curious eyes. He found a bench around the side and sat down. The soft light of the afternoon sun and the lingering warmth in the air seemed to add a perfect touch to the situation. He opened the envelope and pulled out the folded paper, blinking as a soft, flowery scent accompanied it. Had she put perfume on the paper? And if so, why? Perhaps her words would explain. He unfolded the paper and stared at the feminine script. Clearly, she was educated, or else she'd had someone who was educated write the letter for her. He supposed that was possible, but if she lived in Chicago, perhaps she had more access to schooling than girls did out here. Schools were becoming more popular, but most girls never finished. That thought gave him pause. If she was educated, why would she want to move out west? And could she be happy if she couldn't use her education out here? Did she perhaps think he would be able to offer her a better life? Maybe he should have explained that he had little. His family was all gone. He had a small house and he worked hard. He considered it a good life, but it was a simple one for sure. Would it be enough for her? He sighed and began to peruse the words. There was only one way to find out. "Dear Mr. Baxter, my name is Elizabeth Parker, and I live in Chicago. My father recently passed away, and I am looking for a new start in life. I have no family here to tie me to Chicago any longer, and believe the West may hold a new adventure for me. I am a Christian woman, and though I am unfamiliar with farming, I am good at keeping house. I have been in charge of keeping my father's house since my mother died. Please let me know at your earliest convenience if you find me agreeable, as I would like to leave Chicago as soon as possible. Elizabeth." Well, that answered a few questions. If she had no family back home, then she might care less about putting her education to good use, and it meant that she would probably stay, as there was nothing to draw her back to Chicago. He'd heard rumors of some men paying for a woman to come out west, only to have her decide a few months later she would rather return home. Money was too scarce to be spent so frivolously. Still, there was little about the woman herself. Yes, she appeared eager to move away from Chicago, but was she too eager? The death of her father could certainly be a reason, if it was true, but how could he tell for sure? She'd said she was a Christian woman, but nothing about church. Did she not attend in Chicago? Maybe the two were synonymous to her, which was why she hadn't clarified. But was this the right move? Was she the right woman? Sighing, he tucked the letter into his pocket and made his way back to his horse. Christian Turner leaned against the general store railing, mumbling to himself, but Carl paid him little mind as he climbed into the saddle. The man had arrived a few months ago, claiming he was a prospector out to find gold, but he seemed to spend more time talking to himself than looking for the precious metal. At first, he'd raised some eyebrows, but now everyone in town had just accepted that he might be a little light in the head. Sometimes Carl would take a few minutes to have a conversation with the man, but it was getting late today, and it was high time he returned to his homestead and finished his chores. Then he could spend time asking God if Elizabeth was the right woman before he responded. When he arrived at his cabin, he read the letter one more time and then set it on the table to peruse again over dinner. He sent up a prayer for wisdom and then headed out to complete his work for the day. When the sun sank low on the horizon, sending purples and reds streaking across the sky, he put his horse up for the night and returned to his kitchen. It was cold and dark, and he wished again that he had a woman who could make the room feel brighter and have a meal ready when he returned. Could Elizabeth be that woman? His eyes fell to the letter once again as he cut off a slice of bread and chewed to calm the hunger in his stomach. He'd prayed the whole time he was working, but there had been no gut feeling one way or the other, and Carl wasn't sure what that meant. Perhaps it meant that God approved, since he didn't get a negative feeling about the proposal, but he had hoped for a stronger sign that this was God's will. Still, perhaps the fact that he couldn't stop thinking about the woman who wrote the letter was his sign. Decided, he grabbed a piece of stationery from the table and began to write a response to Elizabeth. Dear Miss Parker, I am sorry to hear about your father. Carl paused and tapped the pencil against his lips. This was it. If he wrote to her that he'd like her to come west, he really couldn't change his mind. It wouldn't be fair to her, and he couldn't really just send another letter trying to get to know her. The time it took for a letter to travel and get a response was too long. She might change her mind by then. He closed his eyes and prayed again, only this time he made it more about her. He asked for clarity on whether offering her a ticket would be the right thing for her, and when he felt a strong sense of urgency that she needed out of Chicago, that was enough for him. Opening his eyes, he finished the letter. But I am pleased that you wrote to me. I am enclosing a ticket to make the journey and look forward to meeting you soon. The letter was short, but there was little else he could say, especially not knowing the woman. All he could do was pray this was the right decision. He folded the letter and moved it to the side before placing the leftover beef and beans from dinner on the stove to warm it for supper. He had once enjoyed beef and beans, but when it became his meal 2 to 3 times a day, it quickly lost its appeal. Even if Elizabeth wasn't a great cook, any variety she could bring would be appreciated. When the food was warmed enough, he sat back at the table and began to eat. Like it always did, the silence began to creep in on him, reminding him how very lonely he was. His eyes shifted to the letter. It was the right move. He was sure of it. If she agreed to come, at least he would have someone to talk to in the evenings, and that would make it all worth it.